My people,
Hey
we
guys,
gather
tonight we're
today in
talking about a
unity and
woman who
strength.
spent her entire
Let our
childhood being
voices
told she
rise
mattered,
as one.
and her entire adulthood proving she didn't. Not because she lacked intelligence, not because she lacked courage, because she was born
Sleep
female
well,
in
my
a
little
world that
one.
needed her to be male.
May your
This
dreams
isn't
be
about
sweet.
heroes. It's not about villains.
You
It's
cannot
about
silence
what
the
happens
truth
when
with
your
fear
father
and
decides
threats.
you're a mistake, and the rest
Your
of your
authority
life
is
becomes an
hollow.
argument against that verdict. Before we start, hit like if you want, subscribe if it matters to you. I'm not begging, just letting you know the option exists. And if you've got a story about being told you weren't good enough or watching someone you loved get erased by people who should have protected them, drop it in the comments. This one's for all of us who know what it's like when legitimacy gets weaponized. Now get comfortable. Pour something if you need it. We'll be here a while, and that's fine. February morning, 1516, St. Mary's City, Maryland colony. The midwife held up the infant still slick with birth and announced the words that would define a life. "A healthy girl, Your Excellency." Governor Aldrich Thorne VIII stood at the window of the manor, looking out over the Chesapeake Bay. The water was gray that morning, cold, the kind of February that promised spring but delivered ice. He didn't turn around. Behind him, his wife Elspeth of Castile lay in the bed exhausted, holding her arms out for the child she'd carried for 9 months. The midwife placed the baby against her chest. Elspeth looked down at the tiny face, the shock of red hair already visible, and smiled through tears. "She's beautiful," Elspeth whispered. Aldrich finally turned, walked to the bed, looked down at the infant, who blinked up at him with eyes that hadn't yet decided what color they'd be. "A daughter," he said. Not a question, a statement of unfortunate fact. "Yes," Elspeth said. "Margot, we agreed on Margot if she was a girl." Aldrich nodded once. "Margot Thorne, Lady Princess of Maryland." He said the title like a man reading from a script he didn't believe in. Then he walked out of the room. Didn't hold the baby, didn't kiss his wife, just left. The midwife and Elspeth exchanged a look, the kind of look women share when they know something has just broken that will never properly heal. Outside, the bells of St. Mary's Cathedral rang to announce the birth. The citizens of the colony gathered in the square, waiting for the governor to appear on the balcony and present the heir. They waited 40 minutes. When Aldrich finally stepped out alone, the crowd fell silent. "My wife has delivered a healthy child," he said, "a daughter, Margot. Pray for her health, and pray that the next one is a son." The crowd cheered because that's what crowds do, but the message was clear. This child was a placeholder, a temporary inconvenience until the real heir arrived. Margot Thorne entered the world celebrated and dismissed in the same breath. The early years were strange, contradictory. Margot was celebrated for things that should have made her valuable, then punished for being the gender that made those things irrelevant. At 4 years old, she could read, not children's books, the Bible, in Latin. By her 5th year, she was learning Greek from a tutor her mother had imported from Williamsburg. The man was astonished. He wrote letters to colleagues describing a child who absorbed language like cloth absorbs water. At 6, Margot played the harpsichord well enough that visiting dignitaries would stop their conversations to listen. Her small hands moved across the keys with a precision that seemed impossible for someone so young. Aldrich would show her off at state dinners. Bring her into the hall where ambassadors from Spain, France, England sat eating roasted duck and discussing trade routes. He'd place her at the instrument and say, "My daughter, 6 years old, watch." And Margot would play. Some complex piece by a composer whose name she'd memorized along with the notes. The room would go quiet. Men who'd spent decades in royal courts would set down their wine and actually pay attention. When she finished, they'd applaud. Aldrich would beam. For a moment, he'd look at her like she mattered. Then the moment would pass. He'd send her back to her chambers. Return to his conversations about lumber exports and shipping schedules. And Margot would walk through the hallways alone, trying to figure out why excellence felt like failure. Her mother understood. Elspeth had lived this before in Spain, watching brilliant women get reduced to decorative objects. She tried to prepare Margot for the reality without destroying the child's spirit. "You are extraordinary," Elspeth would tell her, brushing Margot's red hair before bed. "Never doubt that, but the world will doubt it. They will celebrate your mind and then tell you it doesn't matter." "Do you understand?" Margot, 7 years old, nodded. "Because I'm a girl." "Because you're a girl," Elspeth confirmed. "And because your father needs a son to inherit Maryland. Until he has one, you exist in a strange space, valuable and worthless at the same time." "Will he ever love me?" Margot asked. The kind of question children ask when they already know the answer, but need to hear it from someone else. Elspeth pulled her daughter close. He loves what you represent. The possibility that if you can be this brilliant, maybe the son will be too. But love you for yourself, I don't know, my darling, I don't know. It was the most honest answer anyone ever gave Margot Thorne, and it was the answer that would shape everything that followed. The pregnancies came regularly after that. Elspeth, desperate to give Aldrich the son he demanded, kept trying. The colony watched her belly swell, watched her retreat into confinement, watched the midwives rush in and out of the manor, and then inevitably watched the small coffins carried out. One stillborn boy, 1518. Twin girls born too early, dead within hours, 1,519. Another boy lived 3 days, 1,520. A girl survived 2 weeks, 1,522. Each death carved something out of Elspeth. She'd emerge from childbed thinner, paler, a little more hollow behind the eyes. But she'd recover, and 6 months later she'd be pregnant again. That was the job. That was the purpose. Produce an heir or become obsolete. Margot watched all of this from the margins. 8 years old, 9, 10, standing in hallways while her mother screamed in labor, sitting in the chapel while tiny caskets were blessed and buried, listening to her father's footsteps pace the floor above her bedroom, furious and impotent. And she began to understand something fundamental about power. It didn't matter how smart you were, how talented, how beloved by tutors and ambassadors. If you couldn't produce the one thing the system required, you were nothing. Her father started avoiding her, not dramatically, just gradually. Fewer dinners together, fewer requests to perform for guests. He'd pass her in the hallway and nod the way you'd acknowledge a servant. Polite, distant, transactional. By the time Margot turned 12, she'd become a ghost in her own home. The only person who still saw her was her mother. Elspeth, exhausted and grieving, would still spend hours with Margot in the garden behind the manor. They'd walk among the roses Elspeth had planted years before, speaking Spanish together so the servants couldn't understand. "Do you resent me?" Elspeth asked one afternoon. It was spring. The roses were blooming. The air smelled like earth and possibility. "For what?" Margot asked. "For bringing you into this world, for making you hope you mattered, and then watching the world prove you don't." Margot considered the question. 13 now, old enough to see the cage clearly. "No," she said finally. "I resent him. He needs something you can't give and punishes both of us for it." Elspeth smiled sadly. "He's afraid you know. Maryland is fragile. The colony barely survives. If he dies without a son, the council could dissolve the governorship. Everything he's built could vanish. So he's not cruel for pleasure. He's cruel because he's desperate." "Does that make it better?" Margot asked. "No," Elspeth admitted. "It just makes it understandable. Which is worse in a way. If he was evil, we could hate him cleanly. But he's just weak. And weak men with power are more dangerous than evil ones." They walked in silence for a while. A servant approached, bowed, whispered something to Elspeth. Her face went pale. "What is it?" Margot asked. Elspeth looked at her daughter, opened her mouth, closed it. "Finally, your father has requested a meeting with the Archbishop. He wants to discuss the validity of our marriage." Margot, 13 years old, felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "What does that mean?" Elspeth's voice was steady, calm, the kind of calm that comes from knowing the worst has finally arrived and there's nothing left to fear. "It means he's found a way to erase me, and probably you too." The year was 1533. Margot had just turned 17. By then she'd grown into a young woman who turned heads. The red hair had darkened to auburn. The green eyes had settled into a shade that seemed to change with the light. She was small, delicate in build, but carried herself with a posture that suggested she was taller than she actually was. Ambassadors still praised her intelligence, still wrote letters home describing the governor's remarkable daughter who could debate theology in Latin and play music that made grown men weep. But Aldrich had stopped showing her off. He had other plans. The announcement came in March. No warning, no private conversation, just a proclamation read in the square by the town crier, that relic of a position that should have disappeared generations ago, but somehow persisted. "By order of Governor Aldrich Thorne VIII, let it be known that the marriage contracted between himself and Elspeth of Castile is hereby declared null and void, having been made in violation of divine law." The crowd in the square murmured, confused. Elspeth was beloved, quiet, dignified, charitable. She'd suffered through pregnancy after pregnancy trying to give Maryland an heir. What law had she violated? The crier continued, "It has come to light that Lady Elspeth was previously betrothed to the governor's late brother, Aldrich Thorne VII, who died before the marriage could be consummated. Church law forbids a man from marrying his brother's intended. Therefore, the union was never valid. Therefore, any issue from said union is illegitimate. The last word hung in the air like smoke. Illegitimate. Margot stood on the balcony of her room listening. She felt her hands grip the railing, felt her knuckles go white. Illegitimate. Bastard. Not the lady princess, just Lady Margot, a girl with no claim to anything. Below, people were shouting questions. The crier ignored them, rolled up the proclamation, and left. That was it. 17 years of identity erased in 90 seconds. Margot turned from the balcony and walked to her mother's chambers. Found Elspeth sitting by the window staring at nothing. Did you know? Margot asked. I suspected, Elspeth said quietly. He's been meeting with church officials for months. I knew he was looking for an exit. I just didn't know which door he'd choose. Was it true? Were you betrothed to his brother? Briefly, when I was 14, before Aldrich VII died of fever. The betrothal was dissolved, properly, legally. But your father has convinced the archbishop to reinterpret the law, to declare that any connection, however tenuous, invalidates the marriage. Elspeth's voice was steady. She'd had time to prepare for this, to accept it. But her hands shook. Margot sat beside her. What happens now? To me, exile. He's arranged for me to move to a manor in Richmond, Virginia, far enough away that I'm not an embarrassment, close enough that he can claim he's being merciful. And me, Elspeth took her daughter's hand. You'll stay here, for now. But Margot, listen to me. He will ask you to sign a document, a statement acknowledging that you are illegitimate, that the marriage was unlawful, that you have no claim to succession. I won't sign it. You might have to. I won't betray you. Elspeth's eyes filled with tears for the first time since the announcement. Oh, my darling, this isn't about betrayal. This is about survival. Your father is bringing in a new wife, a young one, Anne Blackwood, 26 years old, beautiful. Protestant, she'll give him what he wants. And when she does, you'll become even more invisible than you are now. Then let me come with you to Richmond. He won't allow it. You're still his daughter, even if you're illegitimate. You're still useful for political marriages. He won't let you go that easily. Margot felt something inside her chest crack. So, I'm trapped. Yes, Elspeth said simply. We both are, just in different rooms of the same prison. They came for Elspeth 3 days later. A carriage, 4 guards, a priest because Aldrich wanted the separation to look civilized, spiritual even. Elspeth was allowed 1 trunk of belongings, 1 servant, no goodbye dinner, no public ceremony. Just a quiet exit through the back gate while the colony pretended not to notice. Margot stood in her room watching from the window. She wanted to run down to throw herself at the carriage to scream that this was wrong. But she knew it would accomplish nothing. Aldrich had made his decision. The church had blessed it. The law supported it. Individual suffering didn't factor into the equation. The carriage pulled away. Elspeth didn't look back. Margot wondered if that was strength or if her mother simply couldn't bear to. That night, Aldrich summoned Margot to his study. She'd been in this room 1,000 times as a child, sitting on the floor while he worked, reading books while he signed documents. Back when he still tolerated her presence. Now the room felt hostile. The walls seemed to lean in. The candlelight threw strange shadows. Aldrich sat behind his desk. In front of him, a single sheet of parchment. Sit, he said. Margot sat. He pushed the parchment toward her. Read it. She did. The language was formal, legal, designed to sound official and therefore unchallengeable. It declared that she, Margot Thorne, acknowledged her parents' marriage as unlawful, that she accepted her status as illegitimate, that she renounced any claim to the title of Lady Princess or to succession of the Maryland governorship. At the bottom, a space for her signature. Sign it, Aldrich said. No. He didn't look surprised, just tired. Margot, don't make this harder than it needs to be. You're asking me to declare my mother a liar and myself a bastard. How is that not hard? Your mother isn't a liar, she's simply the victim of unfortunate circumstances. And you're not a bastard in the pejorative sense. You're just born of an invalid union. It's a legal distinction. It's erasure. Aldrich leaned back in his chair, studied her face like she was a problem he couldn't quite solve. You look like her, he said quietly. Same eyes, same stubborn tilt of the chin when you've decided you're right and the world is wrong. Is that why you can't stand to look at me? The question hung between them. Aldrich's jaw tightened. I don't hate you, Margot. I need you to understand that. You're brilliant, talented, everything a father could want in a child. But you're not a son, and Maryland needs a son. So yes, I've had to make decisions that hurt you, that hurt your mother, but I'm not doing this out of cruelty. I'm doing it out of necessity. Necessity, Margot repeated. The word tasted like ash. Sign the document, Aldrich said again. Make this easy. I'll restore you to court. You'll have your chambers back, your tutors, your music. You'll just do it as Lady Margot instead of Lady Princess. Is the title really worth destroying your future over? Margot stood, looked at the parchment, looked at her father. The title isn't what matters, she said quietly. What matters is that my mother spent 17 years loving a man who erased her the moment she stopped being useful. What matters is that I spent 17 years trying to be good enough for a father who decided before I was born that I never would be. So no, I won't sign. Not because the title matters. My mother's honor matters. And mine does too. She walked to the door. Margot, Aldrich called after her. His voice had changed, harder now. If you don't sign, I will make your life very difficult. She stopped, didn't turn around. You already have, she said, then left. The next morning, guards appeared at her door. Lady Margot, one of them said, not meeting her eyes. The governor has ordered your transfer to Hampton Manor in Virginia. You're to leave within the hour. Transfer, Margot said flatly. You mean exile? The guard said nothing, which was answer enough. She was allowed 2 trunks, 1 servant, Martha, the woman who'd served Elspeth and who volunteered to follow Margot because someone needed to. No trial, no formal charges, just removal. Aldrich was good at that, making people disappear without the mess of actual execution. The journey to Hampton Manor took 4 days. 4 days of rutted roads and cold nights, and the growing understanding that her childhood was over. That the girl who'd played harpsichord for ambassadors had died the moment that proclamation was read in the square. Hampton Manor was beautiful in the way that prisons can be when they're designed for nobility. Sprawling gardens, high ceilings, windows that let in light but were too high to climb through. Margot was given a suite of rooms, comfortable, well-appointed, and completely isolated. No visitors without Aldrich's permission, no correspondence without review, no leaving the grounds. 17 years old and her life had become a waiting room. Martha did her best, brought Margot books from the library, set up the harpsichord in the corner, tried to maintain routines that suggested normalcy. But at night alone, Margot would stand at the window looking toward Richmond, toward where her mother was confined in her own beautiful cage. And she'd wonder which of them had it worse, the woman who'd been erased, or the daughter who'd been kept alive just in case she became useful again. The years at Hampton Manor blurred together. 1538, Margot turned 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. Birthdays marked only by Martha's quiet acknowledgement and a letter from Elspeth that took 3 weeks to arrive and had clearly been opened and read by someone else before reaching Margot's hands. The letters were careful, coded. Elspeth couldn't write openly about Aldrich's cruelty or the injustice of their situation. So she wrote about gardens, about the roses she was planting in Richmond, about the weather, about faith. But Margot could read between the lines, could see her mother's loneliness in the way she described flowers that no one else would see, could feel her desperation in the scriptures. She quoted passages about endurance and hope deferred. Martha smuggled uncensored letters out occasionally, found servants traveling between Virginia estates who'd carry messages for a few coins. Those letters were different, raw, honest. I think about you every day, Elspeth wrote in one. I imagine you playing music in that prison they've built for you. I imagine you reading, studying, refusing to let them make you small. Hold firm, my darling, they can take titles. They can take freedom, but they cannot take who you are unless you let them. Margot kept every letter, tied them with ribbon, and hid them in a box beneath a loose floorboard. They were evidence, proof that she'd been loved, that someone had seen her and decided she mattered. News from St. Mary's City arrived in fragments. Anne Blackwood had given birth. 1534. A girl, Elizabeth. Aldrich was furious according to the rumors. Another daughter, another failure. But he doted on Elizabeth anyway. Dressed her in silks, showed her off. Elizabeth was legitimate, born of the proper marriage, the one that counted. Margot tried not to care, tried to tell herself that her half-sister's existence didn't diminish her own. But late at night, she'd imagine Elizabeth in the rooms that used to be hers, playing the harpsichord that used to be hers, receiving the affection that used to be hers. It wasn't the child's fault. Elizabeth was innocent, but innocence didn't make the erasure hurt less. In early 1539, Martha came to Margot's room with a face gone pale. What is it? Margot asked. Martha handed her a letter. Official seal. Not from Elspeth. Margot opened it, read 3 lines, sat down hard on the bed. No, she whispered. The letter was from the administrator of the Richmond estate, formal, apologetic, informing Lady Margot that her mother Elspeth of Castile had died peacefully in her sleep. No suffering, the letter claimed. It included a second letter, sealed with wax, addressed to Margot in her mother's handwriting. My final words, it said on the outside, to be opened only by my daughter. Margot's hands shook as she broke the seal. My dearest Margot, if you are reading this, I am gone. I have asked the estate administrator to hold this letter and deliver it upon my death. I do not know when that will be, but I know it is coming. I feel it in my bones in the way I wake each morning more tired than the night before. There are things I need you to know, things I could never write in the letters that were opened and read before they reached you. First, I do not regret you, not for a single moment. When I held you for the first time, when I saw your red hair and your fierce little face, I knew you would be extraordinary. And you are. You have exceeded every hope I had. Your father is a fool for not seeing it, but his blindness is not your flaw. It is his. Second, do not sign that document. I know he has asked. I know he will ask again. He will offer you safety, comfort, restoration. He will make it sound reasonable. But Margot, if you sign, you are not just declaring yourself illegitimate. You are declaring that I was never your father's true wife, that our marriage meant nothing, that the 17 years I spent loving him and bearing his children were a lie. I know I have no right to ask this of you. I am dead and beyond consequences. You are alive and must live with whatever choice you make. But please, my darling, hold firm. Not for me, for yourself. For the moment you sign that paper, you will have accepted that your worth is determined by other people's definitions. And you are worth more than that. Third, forgive your father if you can, not because he deserves it, but because carrying hate will destroy you faster than any exile. He is weak, frightened, desperate for control in a world that gives him none. He has hurt us both because hurting us felt like power. But power built on cruelty is not real power. It is just cruelty with a fancy title. Finally survive, however you must, whatever it takes. There are rumors that Anne Blackwood is falling out of favor, that Aldrich is looking for another way out, another marriage, another chance at a son. The world is unstable, Margot. People die. Alliances shift. What seems permanent today may be gone tomorrow. You are young, you are brilliant, you are legitimate in every way that matters, regardless of what any document says. Your time will come. I may not live to see it, but I believe in it. I believe in you. Live, my darling, live fiercely, live truthfully. And when the world tries to make you small, remember that you come from a line of women who refuse to disappear. I love you. I have always loved you. I will love you beyond death. Your mother, Elspeth. Margot read the letter 3 times. Then a fourth. Then she pressed it to her chest and wept. Martha sat beside her silent. There were no words, no comfort that could bridge the space between living and losing. When Margot finally looked up, her eyes were red but dry. I want to attend the funeral, she said. Your father has forbidden it, Martha said gently. He sent word that you are not to leave Hampton Manor under any circumstances. She was my mother. I know. I should be there. I should be the one to bury her, to say the prayers, to make sure she's remembered as more than the woman who failed to produce an heir. Martha took Margot's hand. She is remembered. By you. That's what matters. But it didn't feel like enough. It felt like one more thing stolen, one more indignity in a lifetime of them. The day of the funeral, Margot knelt in the chapel at Hampton Manor, alone except for Martha, who stood quietly in the back. She prayed. Not the formal prayers of the Catholic Mass, though she knew those too. Private prayers. Conversation with God or her mother or the universe or whoever might be listening. I don't know how to do this, she said aloud. I don't know how to live in a world where you're gone, where there's no one left who sees me as more than a problem to be managed. Silence. Just the sound of wind outside and her own breathing. He wants me to sign. You told me not to. But mother, what if that's the only way forward? What if holding on to principle just means dying slowly in this beautiful cage? More silence. Tell me what to do, she whispered. Please, I need a sign. Anything. Nothing came, no divine intervention, no sudden clarity, just the empty chapel and a grief so heavy it felt like drowning. She stayed there until nightfall, until Martha gently touched her shoulder and said it was time to return to her rooms. As they walked through the hallway, a servant approached, young man nervous, carrying a sealed envelope. For Lady Margot, he said quietly, from the governor. Martha took it, opened it after the servant left, read it. Her face hardened. "What is it?" Margot asked. Martha handed her the letter. It was brief, direct. No condolences for her mother's death. Just business. Margot, in light of recent events, I am prepared to offer reconciliation. Sign the enclosed document and acknowledging your status, and you will be restored to court. You will have your chambers in St. Mary's City, your tutors, your place at formal events. You will be cared for and protected. Refuse, and you will remain at Hampton Manor indefinitely. Your mother is dead. There is no one left to fight for your legitimacy. This is your last chance to choose a future that does not end in obscurity. The choice is yours. Governor Aldrich Thorne VIII attached was the same document from 6 years ago. The declaration of illegitimacy, the renunciation of claim, the signature line still blank. Margot stood in the hallway holding her father's ultimatum in one hand and her mother's final letter in the other. Two futures, two versions of herself. Sign and survive. Refuse and slowly disappear. "What will you do?" Martha asked. Margot looked at the signature line, at the space where her name would go, where her capitulation would be recorded for history. She thought about her mother's words. "Hold firm, never sign away my honor." She thought about 6 years of exile, of loneliness, of watching her youth vanish into a prison made of silk and stone. She thought about survival, about what it kicked, about whether principle was worth more than breath. And then she walked to the desk in her room, picked up a quill, dipped it in ink. Her hand hovered over the page. "My lady," Martha said quietly, "whatever you choose, I will stand by you." Margot closed her eyes, remembered her mother's face, remembered being 7 years old asking if her father would ever love her. Remembered Elspeth's answer. "I don't know, my darling. I don't know." She opened her eyes, looked at the document, at the lie it wanted her to make truth, and then slowly, with a hand that trembled but did not stop, she signed. Margot Thorne, not Lady Princess, not rightful heir. Just Margot Thorne, illegitimate daughter of a dead woman and a living man who'd erased them both. She set down the quill, stared at her signature. "I'm sorry, Mother," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Martha said nothing, just gathered the document, sealed it, and prepared to send it back to St. Mary's City. Margot walked to the window, looked out at the Virginia countryside, at the gardens her mother would never plant, at the world that would keep turning whether she was legitimate or not. She had survived. She had chosen breath over principle, and she would spend the rest of her life wondering if she'd made the right choice, or if she'd simply made the only choice weak people make when stronger ones aren't available. Either way, it was done. The girl who'd refused to sign was gone. The woman who'd signed to survive had taken her place. And somewhere in Richmond, in a grave marked with a simple stone, Elspeth of Castile rested. Loving a daughter who'd betrayed her memory, forgiving her anyway. Mothers do that, even after death, even when the betrayal is reasonable, even when survival requires sacrifice. They love, they forgive. They hope the daughter they raised will somehow someday find a way to be both soft and strong at the same time. Margot stood at that window until the stars came out, until Martha brought her tea she didn't drink, until exhaustion pulled her toward a bed she wouldn't sleep in. And in the morning the document would be delivered, the signature would be witnessed, the erasure would be complete. But tonight, for one more night, she was still Elspeth's daughter, still the girl who'd been loved without condition, still someone's whole world. Tomorrow could take that away. Tonight she held on. The carriage that brought Margot back to St. Mary's City arrived on a Tuesday morning in September 1540. 7 years since she'd been sent away. 7 years since she'd seen the Chesapeake Bay from these streets, smelled the salt air mixed with tobacco smoke, and horse manure, heard the cathedral bells ring the hours. 24 years old now. Not old by most measures, but old enough to know that the girl who'd left this city was dead. The woman returning in her place had learned things about survival that couldn't be unlearned. The carriage stopped at the rear entrance of the governor's mansion. Not the front. That would have been too public, too much of an acknowledgement. Margot understood the message. She was being allowed back, not welcomed. Martha climbed down first, then helped Margot descend. The September sun was warm on her face. She'd forgotten what Maryland light felt like. Sharper than Virginia. More honest somehow. A servant she didn't recognize met them at the door. Young woman, maybe 18, with eyes that wouldn't quite meet Margot's. "Lady Margot," the girl said, with emphasis on the lady and careful avoidance of anything that might suggest princess. "The governor has arranged chambers for you in the East Wing, if you'll follow me." They walked through hallways Margot had run through as a child. The portraits on the walls were the same. Same thorn ancestors staring down with expressions that managed to be both severe and vacant. But there were new additions. A large painting of Anne Blackwood in her prime before whatever had happened to her happened, and beside it a smaller portrait of a little girl with dark hair and serious eyes. Elizabeth, 6 years old now. Margot's half-sister, the legitimate one. Margot stopped in front of the portrait, studied the child's face, tried to feel something, resentment maybe, or curiosity. But all she felt was a distant recognition that this small person had taken her place and neither of them had chosen it. "She's in the nursery," the servant said quietly. "If you'd like to meet her." "Does she know about me?" "She knows you exist. I don't know what she's been told beyond that." Margot shook her head. "Later. Show me to my rooms first." The East Wing was as far from the governor's chambers as you could get while still being in the same building. The rooms were fine, well appointed, but smaller than what she'd had as a child, and the windows faced the servants' courtyard instead of the bay. Another message. "You're here, but know your place." Martha began unpacking while Margot walked to the window. Watch servants carry water haul wood scrub floors, ordinary people doing ordinary work. She envied them. They knew what they were. No ambiguity about legitimacy or succession, just labor in exchange for wages. Simple, honest. A knock at the door. "Enter," Margot said. A man in his 50s stepped in, well-dressed but not ostentatiously so. He had the look of someone who'd spent a lifetime navigating the space between power and service. His eyes were kind, careful but kind. "Lady Margot," he said, bowing slightly, "I'm Ambassador Charles Pemberton. I served your mother when she was mistress of this household. I wanted to welcome you home." Margot studied him, remembered vaguely that her mother had mentioned a Pemberton in her letters, someone who'd been loyal when loyalty became dangerous. "Thank you, Ambassador, though home feels like a generous word for what this is." Pemberton's mouth twitched into something that might have been a smile. "Generous words are the currency of this place, my lady. You'll find we trade in them heavily." "And what's the exchange rate for honest ones?" "Considerably higher, which is why they're rare." Margot found herself almost smiling. "You knew my mother well." "As well as anyone was permitted to know her. She was a remarkable woman, dignified even when they tried to strip her of dignity." "You remind me of her." "I signed the document she told me never to sign." Pemberton nodded slowly. "I know. I was there when it was presented to the governor. I watched him read your signature." He looked relieved. "And if I may say so, you made the only choice available to you. Your mother would have understood that." "Would she? Well, she understood survival, Lady Margot. She practiced it for 17 years in a marriage that was dissolving long before it was legally ended. She would not have wanted you to die for principle when living for eventual justice was still possible." Margot turned back to the window. "And is it possible, I mean, justice?" "The world changes," Pemberton said carefully. "People die. New alliances form. What seems permanent has a way of becoming temporary. Your father is 48 now, in good health, but health is a fickle thing, and he still has no son. He has me, for whatever that's worth. You're worth more than you think, and less than you deserve. But worth is contextual, my lady. Today you're the illegitimate daughter he tolerates. Tomorrow you might be something else entirely." He bowed again. "I'll leave you to settle in. But know that there are people in this household who remember your mother with love and who see you with clear eyes. You're not as alone as you might feel." After he left, Martha came to stand beside Margot at the window. "He's right, you know," Martha said, "about the world changing. I've served in enough noble houses to know that today's certainties become tomorrow's impossibilities with frightening speed." "Did my mother ask you to follow me?" Margot asked. "When she knew she was dying, did she ask you to stay with me?" Martha was quiet for a moment. "She asked me to help you survive. She said you'd need someone who remembered her, who could remind you where you came from when the world tried to rewrite your history." "And has it rewritten my history?" "They're trying. The official version now is that your mother was a tragic mistake, a well-meaning woman caught in an unfortunate betrothal technicality. You're portrayed as a victim of circumstances, not malice. It's softer that way, easier to digest. Softer lies are still lies. Yes, but they're the kind of lies people can live with, and living with them means you get to stay alive, which is the point." Margot leaned her forehead against the window glass. It was cool against her skin. Grounding. "I don't know how to do this, Martha. I don't know how to smile at the man who erased my mother and pretend we're a functional family. I don't know how to navigate a court where everyone knows I'm here on sufferance. You learn, Martha said simply, one day at a time, one smile at a time, one strategic silence at a time. Your mother did it. You can too. Dinner that evening was a formal affair. Margot was expected to attend. She dressed carefully. Nothing too fine that would seem presumptuous. Nothing too plain that would seem bitter. A middle ground that suggested acceptance without enthusiasm. The dining hall was full. Aldrich at the head of the table, of course. Beside him, a woman Margot didn't recognize. Younger than Anne Blackwood had been, maybe 30. Blonde hair, pale skin, a gentle expression that seemed genuine rather than performed. Margot, Aldrich said as she entered. His voice was cordial, pleasant, as if the last 7 years had been a minor administrative delay rather than exile. Come, meet Jane Seymour, my wife. Wife. So Anne Blackwood was gone. Margot wondered how. Illness, disgrace, execution. The questions must have shown on her face because Aldrich added Anne was found guilty of adultery and treason. She was executed 2 months ago. He said it the way someone might mention a change in the weather. Margot felt something cold settle in her stomach. This was what happened to women who failed. They got erased. Legally. Permanently. Jane Seymour stood and walked to Margot. Took both her hands in a gesture that felt surprisingly warm. I've heard much about you, Lady Margot. Your father speaks of your intelligence and musical talent. I hope we'll become friends. The kindness seemed real. Margot didn't trust it, but she recognized it. Thank you, Lady Seymour. I hope the same. They sat. Servants brought food, roasted venison, fresh bread, wine from Virginia vineyards. The meal was elegant, expensive, a show of stability and prosperity. How was Hampton Manor? Aldrich asked, cutting his meat with precise movements. Quiet, Margot said. Peaceful. Good. I'm glad you found it comfortable. I wanted to ensure you were well cared for during your absence. Absence, not exile, not imprisonment, just a polite gap in the timeline. It was adequate, Margot said. She could play this game too, reduce trauma to bureaucratic language, make suffering sound like mild inconvenience. Jane watched the exchange with intelligent eyes. She understood what was happening, the careful dance of people pretending the past didn't exist. Margot, Jane said gently, I want you to know that I had no part in what happened to you or your mother. I met your father after those events were already concluded. I hope you won't hold me accountable for them. It was a generous thing to say, more generous than necessary. Margot looked at Jane and saw something she hadn't expected. An ally. Maybe. Potentially. I don't hold you accountable, Lady Seymour. You're not responsible for choices made before you arrived. Jane smiled. Please call me Jane. If we're to live in the same household, formality will become tiresome. Aldrich watched this interaction with apparent approval. He wanted peace. Wanted his household to function smoothly. Wanted the messy past to fade into polite distance. I'm glad you two are getting along, he said. Family is important. Stability is important. Marilyn needs both. Margot nodded, said nothing. Let him interpret her silence however he needed to. After dinner, Jane asked if Margot would walk with her in the garden. The same garden where Margot had walked with Elspeth years ago. But the roses had changed. Overgrown in some places, carefully pruned in others. New colors had been added. White blooms Margot didn't remember. Yellow tea roses that must have been imported. The garden had evolved without her, become something different from the sanctuary she remembered. Your mother planted these original red ones, Jane said, touching a familiar bloom. The servants told me. They still tend them carefully. She was beloved, you know, by the people who actually knew her, but not by history. History is written by whoever survives longest and controls the narrative. Your mother didn't survive. Your father did. So his version became official. But the servants remember, and I've heard their stories. She was kind, dignified, strong in ways that didn't require cruelty. Margot felt tears threatening, pushed them back. Why are you telling me this? 2 reasons. First, I think you need to know that your mother hasn't been forgotten. And second, I want you to understand that I'm not your enemy. I didn't choose this life to cause you pain. I chose it because I'm 30 years old and unmarried women of my station have limited options. Your father offered security. I accepted. It's transactional, yes, but I'm trying to make the best of it. Does he love you? Jane laughed softly. No, he loves the idea of a young wife who might give him a son. I'm the vessel for that hope, not a person he's actually interested in. But I'm treated well. I have autonomy in running the household, and I'm not executed when I fail to perform miracles. By the standards of this world, that's success. They walked in silence for a while. The evening air smelled like roses in the distant bay. I'm pregnant, Jane said quietly. 3 months. No one knows yet, except the physician, and now you. I'm telling you because if I have a son, your life will change again. You'll become even more irrelevant than you already are. I wanted to prepare you. Margot stopped walking, looked at Jane's face in the fading light, saw genuine concern there. And if you have a daughter, then we'll both be disappointing him together. At least we'll have company in our inadequacy. Margot found herself laughing, actually laughing, for the first time in years. The sound felt strange in her throat, unpracticed, but real. Thank you, she said, for being honest. It's the least I can do, Jane said. Now come, let me introduce you to Elizabeth. She's been asking about you since she learned you were returning. The nursery was on the third floor, bright, airy, filled with toys and books and the kind of expensive childhood Margot remembered having before it was taken away. Elizabeth sat at a small table drawing with charcoal on parchment. She looked up when they entered. 6 years old, dark hair like her mother, but with Aldrich's sharp green eyes. Elizabeth, Jane said gently, this is your sister, Margot. Elizabeth studied Margot with the frank assessment only children can manage. No pretense, no politeness, just curiosity. You're the one who lived at Hampton Manor, Elizabeth said. Statement, not question. Yes, Margot said. Why? Your father sent me there. Our father, Elizabeth corrected. We have the same one. Margot knelt to be at eye level with the child. You're right. We do. Same father, different mothers. Is your mother dead? Yes. Mine too. Elizabeth said it matter-of-factly. Anne Blackwood had been executed when Elizabeth was 5. Old enough to remember, young enough to not fully understand. I'm sorry, Margot said. Do you hate me? Elizabeth asked. The question caught Margot off guard. Why would I hate you? I'm legitimate and you're not. Father loves me and not you. I took your place. Margot looked at Jane, who seemed equally surprised by the child's directness. Who told you that? Margot asked gently. Nobody told me. I listened. Servants talk. They think children don't understand, but we do. Margot sat fully on the floor, not caring about her dress. Elizabeth, I don't hate you. You didn't choose to be born any more than I did. You didn't ask to be legitimate while I'm not. None of this is your fault. But do you wish I wasn't here? Margot considered lying, considered saying all the proper things about loving family and accepting God's will. But Elizabeth had been honest. She deserved honesty in return. Sometimes, Margot admitted, sometimes I wish the world was different and I was still the daughter who mattered. But that's not your fault. That's circumstances neither of us controls. Do you understand? Elizabeth nodded slowly. I wish my mother wasn't executed. I know. Everyone says she was bad, that she did terrible things, but I remember her singing to me. She didn't feel bad. Margot reached out, hesitated, then gently touched Elizabeth's hand. People are complicated. They can be kind to some people and cruel to others. Your mother probably loved you very much. That was real. The other things she did don't erase that. Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. She climbed off her chair and, without warning, wrapped her arms around Margot's neck, held on tight. Margot froze, then slowly put her arms around the small body, felt the child trembling. This little girl who'd lost her mother to an executioner's blade. Who knew she was only valued for her legitimacy? Who understood far more than anyone wanted her to? It's all right, Margot whispered. You're all right. They stayed like that until Elizabeth pulled back, wiped her eyes, and returned to her drawing as if the moment hadn't happened. Jane watched with an expression Margot couldn't quite read. Approval, maybe? Or relief? That night, lying in her bed in the East Wing, Margot thought about Elizabeth. About the strange weight of being resented by a 6-year-old who'd done nothing wrong. About how their father had created a world where daughters competed for scraps of his attention simply by existing. And she thought about Jane's pregnancy, about the possibility that in a few months a boy would be born. The heir Aldrich had wanted for decades. The child who would make both Margot and Elizabeth irrelevant. She tried to imagine feeling relieved. No more pressure, no more scrutiny. Just quiet obscurity. But all she felt was hollow. Jane went into labor on a cold March morning in 1541. The entire household went still. Servants whispered prayers. Aldrich paced the halls. Margot stayed in her room listening to the distant sounds of a woman in agony. It took 18 hours. Margot counted them. Listened to Jane's screams getting weaker as the labor progressed. Wondered if this was how her mother had sounded during all those failed pregnancies. Finally, near dawn, a baby's cry. Then silence. Then footsteps rushing. Margot stood at her door, hand on the frame, heart pounding. A physician emerged from Jane's chambers. His face was grim. "The governor has a son," he said to the assembled servants. "Edmund, healthy, strong lungs." Cheers erupted. Margot felt the floor shift beneath her. A son. After all these years, Aldrich finally had what he wanted. "And Lady Seymour?" someone asked. The physician's expression darkened. "She's bleeding. We're trying to stop it. Pray." The cheers died. Servants scattered to chapels, to corners, to anywhere they could kneel, and beg God to save the woman who'd just given Maryland its male heir. Margot walked to Jane's door. A guard stopped her. "No visitors. Governor's orders." "I need to see her." "I'm sorry, my lady. No one goes in." Margot stood there for an hour, two, listening to the frantic activity inside, the physicians shouting orders, servants running for clean linens, hot water medicine. Finally, Aldrich emerged. His face was pale. He looked older than his 49 years. "She's alive," he said to no one in particular. "Weak, but alive. The bleeding has stopped." He walked past Margot without acknowledging her, went to the nursery where his son was being cleaned and swaddled. Margot slipped into Jane's room before anyone could stop her. Jane lay in the bed, white as the sheets. Her blonde hair was dark with sweat. Her eyes were closed, but she was breathing. A servant looked up, startled. "My lady, you shouldn't—" "I'm staying," Margot said quietly. "Just for a moment." She approached the bed, took Jane's hand. It was cold. "You did it," Margot whispered. "You gave him what he wanted. Now you get to rest." Jane's eyes flickered open, focused on Margot with effort. "Boy," she whispered. "Yes, Edmund. He's perfect." A weak smile. "Good. Now, no pressure on you." When Margot felt her throat tighten. "Jane, you need to save your strength. Don't talk." "Listen." Jane's grip tightened slightly. "You're free now. Be grateful. Run if you can." "I'm not going anywhere." "Should—" Jane's eyes closed again. Her hand went limp. The servant rushed over, checked her pulse, her breathing. "She's just sleeping, my lady. The blood loss weakened her. She needs rest." Margot nodded, stood, walked to the door, stopped, turned back. "Take care of her," she said to the servant. "She's the only decent person in this entire godforsaken house." Jane Seymour died 3 days later. Childbed fever, the infection that killed more women than anyone wanted to acknowledge. No amount of prayers or medicine could stop it once it took hold. Margot sat with her the last night, held her hand while Jane drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling about her son, about roses blooming in spring, about hoping Margot would find happiness. "I'm sorry," Jane whispered at one point. "Sorry I couldn't stay, help you." "You helped me more than you know," Margot said. "You showed me kindness when you didn't have to. That's worth everything." Jane smiled, or tried to. Then her breathing changed, became labored. Each inhale a struggle. Each exhale longer than the one before. By sunrise, she was gone. Margot sat with the body for an hour before telling anyone. Just sat there looking at this woman who'd stumbled into their poisonous family and tried to make it better. Who'd succeeded for exactly 5 months before Maryland took her too. Aldrich grieved, genuinely as far as Margot could tell. He'd liked Jane. Not loved her, perhaps, but liked her, respected her. She'd given him a son and died doing it. By his metrics, she'd fulfilled her purpose perfectly. The funeral was elaborate, a state affair. The whole colony attended. They buried Jane in the cathedral cemetery under a marble headstone that praised her virtue and sacrifice. Margot stood at the graveside thinking about her mother buried in Richmond with a simple stone and no governor in attendance. Thinking about Anne Blackwood, probably dumped in an unmarked grave after her execution. Thinking about how quickly women got used up and discarded in the pursuit of male heirs. After the ceremony, she went to the nursery. Edmund was asleep in his cradle, 3 days old, red-faced, tiny fist curled up near his chin, completely oblivious to the fact that his existence had cost his mother everything. Margot stood over him, studied this small creature who'd become the most important person in Maryland the moment he drew breath. She waited to feel resentment, jealousy, anger that this boy would get everything she'd been denied just by accident of anatomy. But all she felt was a strange protective tenderness. "Hello, Edmund," she whispered. "I'm your sister. Well, half-sister, the illegitimate one. You probably won't remember me. Your father will make sure we're not close. But I want you to know something." She reached down, let him grip her finger with his impossibly small hand. "I won't hate you. I won't resent you. None of this is your fault. You didn't ask to be born into this mess any more than I did. So I'm going to be the one person in your life who sees you as more than a symbol or a solution. I'm going to love you simply for being my brother. And that's not negotiable. Edmund made a small noise. Not quite a cry, just awareness that someone was there. Margot stayed until the wet nurse arrived to feed him. Then she left, walked through the halls to her room, sat by her window, and realized something that felt like surrender and liberation at the same time. She'd spent 25 years fighting to matter, fighting to be seen, fighting for a legitimacy that would never be granted. But Edmund's birth had freed her from that fight. She wasn't the heir, wasn't even the spare. She was simply Margot, a woman with a brilliant mind and no official purpose. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Maybe she could stop trying to prove her worth to people who decided she had none. Stop measuring her value by her father's standards. Stop waiting for permission to exist. Maybe she could just be. It wasn't the future she'd imagined as a child, but it was a future. And after everything that felt like a victory, small, bittersweet, but real. 6 years passed in a strange kind of peace. Margot was 31 when everything changed again. She'd spent those years in a comfortable limbo, present at court but peripheral. She played music at state dinners, tutored Elizabeth, who'd grown into a sharp, calculating 12-year-old, spent hours with Edmund, who adored her in the uncomplicated way small children love. Aldrich mostly ignored her, which was fine. She'd learned to find freedom in invisibility. But then Aldrich got sick. It started as a cough, persistent but not alarming. Then came the weight loss, the fatigue, the gray pallor that no amount of rest could fix. By the time physicians confirmed it was consumption, everyone knew he was dying. The household shifted into crisis mode. Wills were updated. The Council of Regents was assembled to manage the transition since Edmund was only 6. Aldrich summoned Margot to his study one evening. She found him thinner than she'd ever seen him, sitting behind the same desk where he'd once demanded she sign away her legitimacy. The circle closing. "Sit," he said. His voice was weaker, the authority still there but fragile. She sat. "I'm dying," Aldrich said. No preamble. "You know this." "Yes." "Edmund will become governor. The Regency Council will guide him until he's 18. Duke Northfield has agreed to lead them. He's a strong administrator, Protestant but competent." Margot said nothing, just watched her father struggle to breathe between sentences. "I wanted to tell you," he paused, coughed. Blood flecked his handkerchief when he pulled it away from his mouth. "I wanted to tell you that I never hated you. You understand that, yes, you had a funny way of showing affection." A ghost of a smile. "Yes, well, I was never good at that. Your mother used to tell me I had the emotional range of a brick. She was right. Why are you telling me this now? I'm dying and I'd like to die without this particular weight. I made you illegitimate to secure Maryland. Not out of malice toward you. The law required it. Do you understand the difference?" "No," Margot said honestly. "From where I sat, the result was the same. Legal justification doesn't make erasure hurt less." Aldrich nodded slowly. "Fair. I suppose that's fair." They sat in silence. The clock ticked. Somewhere in the house, Edmund was probably being put to bed. Elizabeth was likely reading. The ordinary rhythms of life continuing while death waited in this room. "Will you look after Edmund?" Aldrich asked. "Not officially. Northfield and the council will handle governance. But will you be there for him? As family, he'll need someone who isn't using him for political gain. You're asking me to protect the son you had to replace me. I'm asking you to protect your brother." "Yes." Margot thought about 6-year-old Edmund, about the way he lit up when she entered a room, about how he'd started calling her Mags and would grab her hand to show her his latest discovery in the garden. "I'll protect him," she said. "Not for you, for him. That's all I ask." Aldrich died 3 weeks later, quietly, in his sleep, the way powerful men usually hope to go. The funeral was enormous. The whole colony mourned. Margot stood with Elizabeth and Edmund watching their father's coffin lowered into the ground. Elizabeth was dry-eyed and composed. Edmund cried silently into Margot's skirt. "Is father in heaven?" Edmund asked. "I don't know," Margot said honestly, "but he's at peace now. That's what matters." After the funeral, Duke Northfield assembled the household. He was 50 years old, tall, severe, with the kind of face that suggested he'd never laughed at anything in his life. His eyes were cold. "Edmund VI is now governor of Maryland," Northfield announced. "As head of the Regency Council, I will administer the colony until he reaches majority. Our first priority is religious reform. Governor Aldrich allowed Catholic practices to persist too long. That ends now. Margot felt ice slide down her spine. Northfield continued, all public Catholic masses are hereby forbidden. Private devotions will be monitored. Anyone found conducting or attending Catholic worship will face consequences. Elizabeth looked at Margot. Edmund was too young to understand. Margot kept her face neutral, but inside alarms were screaming. The persecution started small, subtle. Chaplains were replaced with Protestant ministers. Catholic books were removed from the library. The icons in the chapel were taken down and destroyed. Margot's private chapel, the one Jane had arranged for her, was raided on a Tuesday. She'd been kneeling there saying morning prayers when soldiers burst in. Northfield stood in the doorway watching. "What is this?" Margot demanded. "Illegal worship," Northfield said calmly. "Catholic masses are forbidden. This is private prayer, in my own chambers. Prayer using Catholic rites, which makes it illegal." He gestured to the soldiers. "Remove everything, altar candlesticks, prayer books, all of it." They stripped the room bare while Margot watched, took the crucifix her mother had given her, the rosary beads that had belonged to Elspeth. Everything. "This is persecution," Margot said quietly. "This is law," Northfield corrected. "If you have grievances, address them to the council. But I'd advise against it. Your position here is already tenuous. Don't give us reasons to reconsider your presence." After they left, Margot sat in the empty room. Just bare walls and floor. The space where God had been now hollow. Martha found her there an hour later. "They've arrested Father Thomas," Martha said. Father Thomas had been the family chaplain since before Margot was born. An old man nearly 70 who'd baptized her and heard her confessions and buried her mother. "On what charges? Conducting Catholic worship. They're taking him to prison." Margot stood. "I need to see Edmund." She found her brother in the nursery being dressed by servants. He was 6, old enough to be governor in name, too young to understand what that meant. "Mags," he said, smiling. Then he saw her face. "What's wrong?" She knelt to his level. "Edmund, I need you to do something for me. Anything. I need you to tell Duke Northfield to release Father Thomas." Edmund's face scrunched in confusion. "Why, Quandam? Father Thomas is old and sick, and arresting him is cruel. You're the governor. You can order his release." "But Duke Northfield said Father Thomas broke the law." "Sometimes laws are wrong, Edmund. Sometimes people in power make rules that hurt innocent people. When that happens, other people in power need to stand up and say no." Edmund looked uncertain. "Duke Northfield is very scary." "I know, but you're the governor. He works for you, not the other way around. Do you understand?" Edmund nodded slowly. "I'll try." He didn't succeed. When Edmund asked Northfield to release Father Thomas, the Duke patted the boy's head and said, "When you're older, you'll understand why some mercy is really just weakness." Father Thomas died in prison 3 months later, his crime saying mass for 2 elderly servants who missed the old rites. The situation deteriorated quickly after that. Northfield's council became increasingly aggressive. Catholics were fined for possessing rosaries. Families were investigated for suspicious gatherings. Protestant informants were rewarded for reporting their Catholic neighbors. Margot tried to protect what she could. She hid books in her rooms. Sheltered servants who were being questioned, used what little influence she had to quietly intervene. But her influence was minimal. She was tolerated, not respected. The illegitimate daughter of a dead governor. Useful for tutoring Edmund in Latin and music. Otherwise invisible. The breaking point came in late 1553. Edmund, now 12, called Margot to his chambers. He looked miserable. Older than his years. Trapped. "They want me to write you a letter," he said. "Who does Duke Northfield and the council? They wrote it. I'm supposed to copy it and sign it as an official order from the governor." "What does it say?" Edmund handed her a draft. Margot read it, felt the world tilt. It demanded that Margot renounce Catholicism, that she attend Protestant services, that she publicly acknowledge the Catholic faith as heresy, or face charges of treason. "I don't want to send this," Edmund said. His eyes were wet. "But they said if I don't, they'll remove you from the household. They'll send you away, and I'll never see you again." Margot set down the letter, pulled Edmund into a hug, felt him shaking. "It's all right," she said. "It's not your fault. What will you do? What I have to." She released him, looked at the letter again, at the impossible choice. Betray her faith or lose her freedom. "Tell them no," she said. "Mags, tell them I will not renounce my faith. I will not attend their services. I will not declare my mother's religion heresy. And if they want to charge me with treason for that, they're welcome to try. Edmund's face crumpled. They'll arrest you. Probably. I can't lose you too. I've already lost Father and Mother Jane and everyone. You're all I have left. Margot cupped his face in her hands. Listen to me. You are the governor. Right now they're using you, making you sign things you don't believe, making you a puppet for their agenda. But you're smart, Edmund. You're growing up, and someday you'll be old enough to make your own decisions. When that day comes, be better than they are. Be better than our father was. Don't let power make you cruel. I love you, Mags. I love you too, little brother. 2 days later, soldiers came to her room. Lady Margot Thorne, the captain said, by order of the Regency Council, you are under arrest for refusal to comply with religious reform and suspicion of treasonous Catholic sympathies. You will be confined to Hampton Palace pending investigation. Margot stood, didn't resist, just looked at Martha, who was crying quietly. Take care of Edmund, Margot said, and Elizabeth. They'll need someone. I will, my lady. God be with you. And with you. They let her out through the servants' entrance. No public spectacle this time, just a quiet removal. Erasure by bureaucracy. As the carriage pulled away from St. Mary's City, Margot looked back at the governor's mansion, at the windows where Edmund might be watching, at the life she tried to build from the ruins of the one that was stolen. 37 years old, and she was going back to prison. Not for being illegitimate this time, for being herself. Somehow that felt like progress. Hampton Palace in winter was exactly as Margot remembered, beautiful and hollow. She'd been imprisoned here before at 17, now 37, 20 years of circling back to the same cage. The irony wasn't lost on her. The rooms were the same, east wing overlooking the courtyard. The harpsichord was gone, sold, or moved years ago, but everything else remained. Same windows, same walls, same sense of time suspended. Martha had been allowed to accompany her. Small mercy. They didn't speak much those first days, just existed in the strange limbo of waiting for whatever came next. 3 months passed. Winter turned to spring. No trial, no formal charges, just confinement. Northfield's strategy was elegant in its cruelty. Don't make Margot a martyr by executing her. Just forget about her. Let her fade into irrelevance while the world moved on. But the world had other plans. In June, Edmund got sick. The news arrived via a servant who traveled from St. Mary's City. Margot grabbed the woman's arm, desperate. How sick? Very, my lady. Consumption. Same as your father. The physicians don't expect him to recover. Margot felt the floor drop. Edmund, her little brother, 12 years old, dying. I need to see him. Duke Northfield has forbidden it. No visitors except the council and physicians. He's 12. He's dying alone. Someone needs to be with him. The servant's eyes filled with pity. I'm sorry, my lady. I'm just delivering the news. I have no authority to change it. After the servant left, Margot paced her room like a caged animal. Martha watched helpless. There's nothing you can do, Martha said gently. You're a prisoner. You can't reach him. He's dying, Martha. He's dying, and he's probably terrified, and the only people around him are politicians calculating how his death benefits them. She stopped pacing, pressed her forehead against the window glass. This is my punishment, she whispered. Not the imprisonment. This, knowing he needs me and being unable to help. Edmund died on July 6, 1554. Margot learned about it 3 days later. The official messengers hadn't bothered informing her promptly. Why would they? She was nobody, an inconvenient relic of the previous administration. She stood in her room holding the letter that announced his death and felt something inside her break that hadn't broken before. Not when her mother died. Not when she'd signed away her legitimacy. Not through any of the humiliations and betrayals. But this, losing Edmund, the one person who'd loved her without agenda, who'd called her Mags and held her hand and trusted her when everyone else saw her as a problem to be managed. This broke her. Martha found her on the floor, letter still clutched in her hand, making sounds that weren't quite crying. Something deeper, older. The grief of watching everyone you love get taken while you're forced to survive. I'm sorry, Martha whispered, holding her. I'm so sorry. They stayed like that until the sound stopped and Margot went quiet, hollow. What happens now? Margot asked eventually. Her voice was flat, empty. I don't know. Edmund had no children, no wife. The succession is unclear. I'm his half-sister. By blood, I'm next. You're illegitimate, my lady. The council will never recognize your claim. Then who? Martha hesitated. Rumor is they've already chosen Lady Jane Ashford, Edmund's cousin, Protestant, 16 years old, easily controlled. Margot laughed. It sounded broken. Of course, another puppet, another girl who will do what she's told until they're done with her. She stood, walked to the window, looked out at Virginia countryside that had witnessed both her imprisonments. I'm not staying here, she said quietly. My lady, I'm not staying here waiting for them to decide whether to execute me or just let me rot. Edmund is dead, the succession is open, and I am Aldrich Thorne's eldest living child. Legitimate or not, I have a claim. They have guards, you're under arrest. Then I'll have to be creative. The escape happened on a Thursday night. Martha had spent weeks cultivating relationships with the guards, finding the ones who drank, the ones who gambled, the ones who could be bribed or distracted. She'd also been communicating with Ambassador Pemberton through servants traveling between Virginia and Maryland. Pemberton had connections, resources, and he'd loved Elspeth enough to help her daughter. When the moment came, it was almost anticlimactic. The guard on duty that night was a young man named Thomas, 23, owed gambling debts. Martha offered him enough money to cover them. He looked the other way while Margot and Martha slipped out through the servants' quarters. 2 horses waited in the woods, provided by Pemberton's network, along with men's clothing, travel supplies, and a map. You're sure about this? Martha asked as they mounted. No, Margot said, but I'm doing it anyway. They rode north, toward Maryland, toward St. Mary's City, toward whatever waited there. The journey took 2 days. They avoided main roads, sleeping rough, eating dried meat and stale bread. Margot's body ached from riding. She hadn't been on a horse in years, but the physical pain was almost welcome. Something concrete to focus on besides the impossibility of what she was attempting. On the second night camped in a clearing, Martha asked the question she'd been holding back. What's your plan when we reach St. Mary's? Rally support, claim my right as Aldrich's daughter, force the council to acknowledge that blood matters more than legitimacy documents. And if they refuse, then I fight. You're one woman, my lady. Northfield has an army. Margot stared into the fire. I'm one woman with a legitimate grievance and nothing left to lose. That's more dangerous than an army. They reached the outskirts of St. Mary's City on Sunday morning. Margot expected resistance, expected to have to sneak in to hide to operate from shadows. Instead, what she found was chaos. The city was in uproar. People crowded the streets. Arguments broke out on corners. The cathedral bells rang constantly, no pattern, just noise. Margot and Martha tied their horse and walked into the marketplace. A woman selling bread saw Margot and went pale. Lady Margot, is that truly you? Yes, Margot said. I got signs. What's happening? But no. The council declared Jane Ashford the new governor 3 days ago. But people are angry. She's not of the direct line. You are. People are saying Northfield staged a coup. Another voice, a man this time. The Thorne line should continue, not some cousin from the Piedmont. More people gathered, recognizing Margot, murmuring. The crowd grew. An old man pushed forward. You're Aldrich's daughter. You have claim. I'm illegitimate, Margot said. The law. The law is whatever Northfield says it is. Someone shouted. He declared your father's marriage invalid to suit his purposes. That doesn't make it true. The crowd swelled. People were angry, not necessarily at Jane Ashford, who was just a child being used, but at Northfield, at the manipulation, at the sense that something fundamental had been violated. Ambassador Pemberton appeared at the edge of the crowd. He made his way to Margot, face urgent. My lady, you need to come with me, now, before Northfield's guards find you. We're safe house. Catholic nobles who support your claim. We need to move quickly. Margot looked at the crowd, at people who'd ignored her for years now looking at her like she mattered, like she was the answer to something. I claim the governorship, she said, loud enough for people to hear. I am Aldrich Thorne's eldest child. I have more right to Maryland than any cousin. If you support that claim, spread the word. Tell everyone, the legitimate line continues through me. Cheers erupted. People rushed forward, trying to touch her to pledge support. Pemberton pulled her away through back alleys to a townhouse where Catholic nobles had assembled. Inside, men and women she half recognized from court functions stood waiting. Lord Christopher Winthrop, Lady Margaret Fairfax, a dozen others. Lady Margot, Winthrop said, bowing, we've been hoping you'd come. Northfield's coup is illegal. Jane Ashford has no legitimate claim. You do. I'm illegitimate. Your father's annulment was politically motivated. The archbishop who approved it did so under pressure. Many of us never accepted its validity. You are the rightful heir. Margot looked around the room, at these people risking treason to support her. Why, she asked. Why now you all stood by while I was declared illegitimate, while I was exiled, while Edmund died with Northfield controlling him. Why do you care now? Lady Fairfax stepped forward. Northfield has gone too far. He's persecuting Catholics, seizing property, turning Maryland into a Protestant autocracy. Jane Ashford is his puppet. But you, my lady, you have strength. You've survived everything they've thrown at you. We need that strength now. You need a Catholic governor to protect you from persecution. Yes, Winthrop said bluntly. We do, but we also believe you're the rightful heir. Both things can be true. Margot sat down. The room spun. 2 days ago, she'd been a prisoner. Now she was at the center of a potential civil war. What do you need from me? She asked. Ride, Pemberton said, through Maryland. Let people see you, rally support, show them you're not dead or broken, that you're here and willing to fight for your birthright. And if Northfield's forces come for me, then we fight them. The ride became legendary. Margot, wearing men's riding clothes but making no attempt to hide her identity, rode through Maryland colony with a growing force of supporters. It started with 20 people, Catholic nobles and their retainers. By the time she reached Annapolis 3 days later, the group had swelled to 200. People lined the roads to watch her pass. Some cheered, some were silent, but everyone saw. The daughter who'd been erased refusing to stay erased. Margot's hair, that distinctive auburn red, flew behind her like a banner. She sat tall in the saddle despite exhaustion, despite fear, despite knowing that Northfield could crush this rebellion with his professional soldiers. But something strange was happening. Northfield's forces weren't engaging. Some regiments openly defected to Margot. Others simply didn't show up when ordered to stop her. Protestant soldiers who had no love for Catholicism but respected the principle of legitimate succession. By the time Margot reached the outskirts of St. Mary's City again, her force had grown to over 1,000. Still not an army, but enough. Northfield finally moved. He assembled his loyal troops in the city square, prepared to arrest Margot and execute her for treason. But when Margot rode into the square, the crowd was so massive that soldiers couldn't reach her. Thousands of people, Protestants and Catholics, nobles and commoners, all of them tired of manipulation and ready for something that felt true even if it was messy. Margot dismounted, walked through the crowd to the steps of the cathedral, climbed them, turned to face the people. The noise died down. Everyone waited. I am Margot Thorne, she said, her voice carried in the morning air. Daughter of Aldrich Thorne VIII and Elspeth of Castile. Some call me illegitimate, some call me a pretender, but I stand here as the eldest living child of your former governor. I claim my right to lead Maryland. Northfield stepped forward. You have no right. You were declared illegitimate by law. A law you orchestrated for political convenience, Margot shot back. The same way you orchestrated putting a child on the throne so you could rule through her. Maryland deserves better than puppet governors and shadow rulers. The crowd roared approval. Jane Ashford appeared on a balcony, 16 years old, looking terrified. Margot felt a surge of pity. This girl was as much a victim as anyone. Lady Jane, Margot called up, this is not your fault. You were used. If you step aside willingly, I promise you'll be treated with honor and given a place at court. You're not my enemy. Jane looked at Northfield, back at Margot. Then to everyone's shock, she nodded. I never wanted this, Jane said, voice shaking. I was told I had to, but if there's another way, I'll take it. Northfield's face went purple. You foolish girl, you're the legitimate governor. For 9 days, Jane said, 9 days of being terrified and manipulated. I'm done. If Lady Margot wants Maryland, she can have it. The crowd exploded, cheering, crying, people hugging strangers. Northfield tried to rally his soldiers, but they refused. One by one, they lowered their weapons. Some even joined the crowd. The coup collapsed, not through violence, through a 16-year-old girl saying no and an illegitimate daughter refusing to disappear. August 15th, 1554, St. Mary's Cathedral. Margot stood in the antechamber wearing robes that had belonged to her father. They'd been altered to fit her smaller frame. The deep blue velvet, the gold embroidery, symbols of power she'd never imagined wearing. Martha fussed with the ceremonial collar. Hold still, my lady. This needs to sit properly. I can't breathe. Governors don't breathe. They project authority. Despite everything, Margot smiled. When did you become an expert on governance? When I spent 40 years watching powerful people make terrible decisions. I learned what not to do. The rest is improvisation. A knock at the door. Ambassador Pemberton entered. They're ready for you, Governor Thorne. Governor, the word felt foreign, like wearing someone else's skin. Give me a moment, Margot said. Pemberton nodded, withdrew. Margot walked to the window, looked out at the crowds filling the square, thousands of people waiting to watch her crowned, waiting to see if she'd be different from the men who'd come before. I don't know how to do this, she said quietly. I never trained for governance, never sat in on council meetings, never learned how to manage a colony. You learned how to survive, Martha said. That's harder and more useful. Survival and leadership aren't the same thing. No. But leadership without survival is just performance. You've already proven you can endure. Now you just have to prove you can act. Margot turned from the window, looked at Martha, this woman who'd followed her through exile, imprisonment, flight, who'd never wavered. Thank you, Margot said, for everything, for staying when you had every reason to leave. Your mother asked me to help you survive. I'm just keeping my promise. She'd be proud, you know, of you. Martha's eyes glistened. She'd be proud of you too, my lady. You did what she asked. You held firm. I signed the document. I declared myself illegitimate. To survive. She understood survival, and now look where you are, about to be crowned governor despite everything they did to prevent it. That's not failure, my lady. That's victory. The coronation ceremony was both ancient and improvised. Archbishop William Thornton, who'd approved Aldrich's annulment years ago, now blessed Margot's ascension. Politics made strange partners. Margot knelt before the altar, felt the weight of the ceremonial crown placed on her head. Heavy, gold, studded with stones that had been mined from Maryland soil. The Archbishop's voice rang through the cathedral. By the grace of God and the will of the people, I pronounce Margot Thorne, daughter of Aldrich Thorne, the 8th governor of Maryland Colony. May she rule with wisdom, justice, and mercy. The crowd erupted, cheering that shook the ancient walls. Margot stood, turned to face the people, saw Catholics crying, Protestants looking uncertain. Jane Ashford in the front row applauding genuinely. Elizabeth, now 20, watching with an expression Margot couldn't quite read. And so many others. People she knew, people she didn't. She walked down the aisle, crown on her head, robes trailing. Out onto the cathedral steps where sunlight hit her like a physical thing. The crowd stretched as far as she could see. She raised her hand. Silence fell. I stand before you not as a conqueror, but as your servant, she said. I know many of you have doubts. I'm a woman in a position traditionally held by men. I'm Catholic in a colony divided by faith. I'm the daughter whose legitimacy was questioned for decades. I understand your uncertainty. She paused, let the words settle. But I promise you this, I will govern for all of Maryland. Not just Catholics, not just those who supported my claim. Every person in this colony deserves leadership that sees them as more than political assets. You deserve stability, justice, a future that doesn't require choosing between faith and survival. More cheers. But Margot raised her hand again. I also promise honesty. I will make mistakes. I don't have all the answers. I'm learning as I go. But I will never lie to you about my limitations. And I will surround myself with advisors who care more about Maryland's success than their own power. She looked directly at where Northfield stood in the crowd. He'd been allowed to attend, stripped of office but not arrested. A calculated mercy. The previous administration operated through fear and manipulation. That ends now. We move forward through transparency and mutual respect. Or we don't move forward at all. The speech wasn't eloquent. It wasn't what professional speechwriters would have crafted, but it was real. And the people responded to that reality. As Margot returned to the governor's mansion that evening, exhausted and overwhelmed, Martha helped her remove the ceremonial robes. You did well, Martha said. I fumbled half the ceremonial responses. I nearly dropped the scepter, and my speech sounded like I was making it up as I went. You were making it up as you went. That's what made it effective. People are tired of performance, my lady. They wanted truth. You gave them that. Margot sat on the bed that had been her father's, now hers. The weight of it felt crushing. I won, she said quietly. I'm actually governor. I should feel triumphant, vindicated, something. But all I feel is tired and terrified. That means you understand the magnitude of what you've taken on. That's good. Overconfident rulers are dangerous. How do I do this, Martha? How do I actually govern? One day at a time, one decision at a time, and when you don't know the answer, you find people who do and you listen to them. A knock at the door. A servant entered. Governor Thorne, Ambassador Pemberton requests a meeting regarding the Spanish delegation. They've sent word that King Philip's representative wishes to discuss a potential alliance. Margot looked at Martha, then back at the servant. Tell him I'll meet with him in an hour. I need time to review the diplomatic files first. The servant bowed left. And so it begins, Martha said. And so it begins, Margot agreed. 38 years old, illegitimate, female, Catholic in a fractured colony, and she was governor, against all odds, despite every obstacle, simply by refusing to accept erasure as permanent. Her mother would have been proud. Her father would have been baffled. And Margot herself, she was just trying not to drown. But for the first time in her life, she was drowning in a role she'd chosen, not one that had been assigned to her. That made all the difference. The problem became apparent within weeks. Margot had no husband, no heir, and Marilyn's future depended on both. The council meetings were relentless on this point. Lord Winthrop, Ambassador Pemberton, even Elizabeth brought it up. You need to marry, Elizabeth said bluntly one afternoon. 20 years old now, politically astute, and had none of Margot's hesitation about speaking uncomfortable truths. I'm 38, Elizabeth, past the age most women marry. You're governor. Age is less relevant than stability. Marilyn needs to know there's a succession plan. I could name you my heir. I'm Protestant. Half your supporters backed you specifically because you're Catholic. Naming me would split the colony again. You need a child of your own. Margot hated that Elizabeth was right. The Spanish offer came 3 months into her governorship. King Philip II, widower, 27 years old, needed a political alliance. Maryland, though small, controlled crucial Chesapeake shipping routes. A marriage would benefit both parties. Ambassador Pemberton presented the proposal in council. Philip is young Catholic and commands significant resources. The marriage would legitimize your rule internationally and provide Maryland with Spanish protection. He's 11 years younger than me, Margot pointed out. He's also pragmatic. This is a political arrangement. He understands that. Margot looked around the council table. Everyone was nodding, even the Protestant members who saw Spanish alliance as preferable to French interference. What do we know about him personally? Pemberton hesitated. He's reserved, dutiful. He was married before to the Portuguese princess. She died in childbirth. He's not looking for romance, my lady. He's looking for strategic advantage. How reassuring. But the reality was clear. Margot needed this marriage, not out of desire. Maryland needed it. The announcement caused immediate backlash. Protestant factions erupted in fury. Spanish control had always been their nightmare. Now their Catholic governor was handing them directly to Spain. Thomas Wyatt, a Protestant noble in his 40s, led the opposition. He'd supported Margot's claim over Jane Ashford on principle. But Spanish marriage was different. This is betrayal, Wyatt shouted at a public gathering. We fought for a Maryland governor, not a Spanish puppet. His followers grew. Armed men, angry rhetoric, threats of rebellion. Margot called an emergency council meeting. We need to address this directly, she said. Before Wyatt turns discontent into violence. You shall arrest him, Lord Winthrop suggested. Charge him with sedition. That makes him a martyr. We need to de-escalate, not inflame. Then what do you propose? Margot stood, walked to the window, looked out at St. Mary's City, her city now, her responsibility. I'll speak to them myself, publicly, address their concerns directly. That's dangerous, my lady. These are armed men who see you as the enemy. Then I'll show them I'm not, or I'll die trying. Either way, we'll know where we stand. The speech happened in Guildhall, packed with Wyatt's supporters, angry faces, hostile energy. Margot walked to the podium alone. No guards, no weapons, just her and a room full of people who wanted her to fail. She waited for silence. It took minutes. When it finally came, the tension was thick enough to cut. I know you're angry, she began. You supported my claim to governance out of principle. And now I'm marrying a Spanish king, which looks like I'm selling Maryland to foreign control. I understand why that feels like betrayal. Wyatt stood. Then don't do it. If I don't marry, I have no heir. If I have no heir, what happens when I die? We return to the chaos of disputed succession. Jane Ashford, Elizabeth, foreign claimants. Maryland tears itself apart. Is that what you want? We want a Maryland governor, not a Spanish consort. Margot's voice hardened. I am a Maryland governor, and I will remain Maryland governor after this marriage. Philip will have no authority here. The marriage contract will explicitly limit his power to advisory roles only. He cannot make laws, cannot command troops, cannot override council decisions. This has been negotiated. Murmurs in the crowd, skeptical but listening. I'm not doing this out of desire, Margot continued. I'm doing this because Maryland needs international allies and internal stability. Those two needs outweigh my personal preferences. That's what governance is, making difficult choices for the collective good, even when they cost you individually. She locked eyes with Wyatt. I will die a governor before I surrender Maryland's autonomy. If you don't believe that if you think I'll become a puppet for Spanish interests, then you don't know me. I've spent my entire life fighting to exist. I'm not about to hand that existence over to anyone. Not Philip, not you, not anyone. The room was completely silent now. So here's what I'm asking. Give me a chance to prove my commitment. Support this marriage for Maryland's sake. And if I ever betray that trust, if I ever put Spanish interests above Maryland's, then you have my permission to rebel. Wyatt, you personally have that permission. I'll sign it in blood if you require. Wyatt stared at her. The whole room waited. Finally, slowly, Wyatt sat down. I'll hold you to that, Governor. I'm counting on it, Margot said. The rebellion collapsed after that. Wyatt's followers, seeing their leader stand down, dispersed. Some remained angry, but they remained peaceful. The wedding was scheduled for July 1554 at Winchester Cathedral in Virginia. Neutral ground, large enough for the spectacle required. Margot met Philip 2 days before the ceremony. He arrived with a small Spanish delegation ships anchored in the bay, flags flying. He was handsome in a severe way. Dark hair, sharp features, careful eyes. He bowed when introduced. Governor Thorne, an honor. King Philip, thank you for coming. They sat in the governor's study. Awkward silence. This is unusual for both of us, Philip said finally. His English was accented but clear. A political marriage is standard, but the age difference and your position as governor, less so. If you're concerned about consummation, I'm concerned about expectations. I need you to understand that I view this as strategic alliance. I will fulfill my duties, but I cannot offer you affection or partnership beyond the political. Margot almost laughed. Your Majesty, I'm not looking for love. I'm looking for stability. If you can provide that through presence and legitimacy, that's sufficient. Philip looked relieved. Good, then we understand each other. One question. Do you resent this arrangement, being married to a woman significantly older in a colony you've never seen? Philip considered. Resent is strong. I'm fulfilling obligations, as you are. We're both instruments of state interest. That's simply the reality of power. Bleak but honest. I appreciate that. The wedding itself was magnificent. Orchestrated chaos. Catholic and Protestant clergy sharing the altar. Spanish and Maryland flags intertwined. Hundreds of witnesses. Margot wore white velvet. Philip wore Spanish royal colors. They exchanged vows in Latin and English. Promised fidelity and partnership in terms that sounded intimate but felt transactional. When the priest pronounced them married, the crowd cheered. Maryland had a governor with international backing. Spain had Atlantic shipping routes. Everyone got something, except maybe Margot and Philip, who got each other. And neither had asked for that. The first year of marriage was cordial. Distant but functional. Philip attended council meetings but rarely spoke. He learned Maryland politics through observation, made no demands, interfered with nothing. At night they shared chambers as protocol required. But they maintained separate spaces within those chambers, slept in separate beds, spoke politely about logistics and schedules. And then in November, Margot's monthly bleeding stopped. She waited a month, then another, consulted physicians quietly. They confirmed what seemed impossible. She was pregnant at 38 years old, after 1 year of a largely celibate political marriage. Pregnant, the news spread through the colony like wildfire. Hope ignited. Prayers were offered. Preparations began. Philip seemed genuinely pleased. This is fortunate. Heirs are essential. Margot felt complicated. Happy, yes. Terrified, yes. But also something deeper. This child would prove she was complete, that she could provide what her mother couldn't, that her body wasn't broken. By spring, her belly was visibly swollen. Physicians were optimistic. The pregnancy seemed healthy. Maryland celebrated. The governor was giving them an heir. Catholic and Spanish blood mixed with Thorne legitimacy. The future secured. Margot prepared a nursery, ordered furniture from Spain, chose names. Edmund for a boy, Elspeth for a girl. She imagined holding a child, teaching them, loving them without the complications that had defined her own childhood. June arrived, then July, August. The due date passed. Physicians looked concerned but tried to hide it. Sometimes babies come late, Governor. Nothing to worry about. But Margot was starting to worry. The movement in her belly had stopped. The swelling remained but felt wrong, heavy, strange. September came. Still no labor. October. Philip left for Spain in November. Urgent matters require my presence. I'll return when the child is born. He never came back. December 1555. Margot finally accepted what physicians were too afraid to say. There was no baby. There had never been a baby. Pseudocyesis, phantom pregnancy. Her body, driven by desperate desire and psychological stress, had mimicked pregnancy symptoms so perfectly that even trained physicians believed it. The swelling was fluid. Tumors, hormonal disruption, not life growing inside her, just her body failing in new creative ways. The announcement devastated the colony. People had invested hope in this child. Prayers, plans, now nothing. Margot retreated into the governor's mansion, refused visitors. Martha was the only one allowed near her. I'm broken, Margot said one night, lying in bed staring at nothing. My mother couldn't carry children to term. I can't even conceive them properly. The thorn line ends with me simply because our bodies refuse to cooperate. Your body tried, my lady. It wanted to give you what you wanted so desperately it invented a child. That's not failure. That's tragic proof of desire. Philip's gone. He left because there's no child. He'll never come back. Good, you didn't love him anyway. No, but I love the idea that someone might stay. Martha had no answer for that. Margot returned to governance in January 1556. Thinner, haunted, but functional. The council tiptoed around the pregnancy topic. No one mentioned succession. No one asked about heirs. But the question hung over every meeting. What happens when she dies? Margot governed well despite everything, made practical decisions, balanced Catholic and Protestant interests, improved trade routes, reduced internal corruption. But she couldn't shake the emptiness, the sense that she'd failed at the one thing that mattered most to people who measured women by their reproductive capacity. And then the burnings began. It started small. A Protestant minister arrested for preaching against Catholic doctrine. Margot's council, mostly Catholic, pushed for punishment. She signed the execution order, then another, then 3 more, then a dozen. By mid-1556, Maryland had become a place where dissent meant death. Protestant heretics were burned at stakes in public squares. Families watched, children watched, the smoke visible for miles. Margot told herself she was restoring religious unity, that God required this, that her phantom pregnancy was punishment for being too lenient, and if she enforced Catholic orthodoxy strictly enough, God would reward her with a real child. The logic was insane. She knew it was insane. But grief and desperation don't follow rational paths. By late 1557, 287 people had been executed. Maryland called her Crimson Margot, the governor who ruled through fire. In 1557, it happened again. Her bleeding stopped. Symptoms returned. Physicians were skeptical this time. But the swelling was real. The nausea was real. Maybe everyone thought maybe this time it's real. It wasn't. By late 1557, Margot's health was declining rapidly. The physicians confirmed what they'd suspected. Ovarian tumors, likely cancer, inoperable. She was dying, not dramatically, just steadily. Energy fading, pain increasing, time running out. She stopped the executions. Not out of mercy, just exhaustion. She barely had strength to sign paperwork, let alone condemnation orders. November 1558, Margot was bedridden. Elizabeth came to visit. 34 now, Margot's designated successor. Protestant, competent, everything Margot wasn't. How are you feeling? Elizabeth asked. Like I'm dying. Because I am. Let's not pretend otherwise. Elizabeth sat beside the bed. The council wants me to prepare for transition. They're asking about coronation dates. I'm not dead yet. I know, but they need certainty. Maryland can't function in limbo. Margot looked at her half-sister. This woman who'd been enemy and ally and simply existed in complicated relationship that defied simple categories. Rule better than I did, Margot said quietly. You ruled well. You just had impossible circumstances. I burned Protestants, Elizabeth. Don't sanitize that. I authorized executions of people whose only crime was faith. I became exactly what I feared. Elizabeth was quiet for a moment. Why did you do it? I was desperate, heartbroken, convinced that if I could just enforce religious unity, God would reward me with a child, with Philip's love, with something that proved I mattered. But God doesn't work that way. And all I accomplished was making people hate me. Not everyone hates you. Enough do. History will remember me as Crimson Margot, the governor who persecuted dissent and died barren. That's my legacy. That's part of your legacy. The other part is that you were the first woman governor, that you claimed power despite being declared illegitimate, that you survived things that should have destroyed you. That matters too. Margot felt tears on her face. Weak, embarrassing. But she didn't have energy to hide them. I'm scared, Elizabeth. I'm 42, and I'm dying, and I don't know if any of it meant anything. I don't know if I made things better or just different. Elizabeth took her hand. You made things possible. I'm Protestant. I would never have been considered for governor before you. You broke that barrier. Whatever mistakes you made, that achievement stands. Take care of Martha when I'm gone. She's been with me through everything. Make sure she's provided for. I will. And Elizabeth, don't make my mistake. Don't confuse faith with control. Don't let desperation make you cruel. Rule for the people, not for your own validation. I'll try. Margot died on November 17, 1558, dawn, with Martha holding one hand and Elizabeth holding the other. Her last words whispered so quietly they might have been imagined Maryland, engraved upon my heart. Then silence. Then nothing. The funeral was massive. Catholics and Protestants both attended. Even people who'd hated her acknowledged she deserved ceremony. They buried her in St. Mary's Cathedral, next to her father, ironically, the man who tried to erase her, now eternally beside her. Elizabeth was crowned governor 3 days later, reversed Margot's Catholic policies immediately, restored Protestant worship, ended persecution. Within a year, people were calling Margot Crimson more than governor, the woman who'd burned dissenters, the barren queen, the tragic failure. But 200 years later, when historians started reassessing the narrative shifted. They found her letters, her laws, her governance records. And they found a woman who'd been brutalized by circumstance and responded with both strength and mistakes. Not a villain, not a saint, just a human being trying to survive in a system designed to destroy her, and surviving against all odds long enough to change the rules for whoever came after. Modern day, Maryland State House. A tour guide leads a group of high school students through the portrait gallery. She stops in front of a painting that shows a woman in her late 30s. Auburn hair visible under a ceremonial crown. Green eyes that the artist couldn't quite make look happy even when he tried. The nameplate reads, Governor Margot Thorne, 1516 to 1558. This is Margot Thorne, the guide says, Maryland's first woman governor. She ruled from 1554 to 1558. A student raises her hand. Why do they call her Crimson Margot? She authorized the execution of 287 Protestants during religious conflicts. She was trying to enforce Catholic unity after years of persecution from Protestant regions. She failed. People died. So she was evil. The guide pauses, looks at the portrait, at those sad eyes. She was desperate. Her mother was exiled and died alone. She was declared illegitimate at 17, imprisoned twice. Lost her brother, who was the only person who loved her unconditionally. Then she became governor at 38, married a man who abandoned her, and experienced 2 phantom pregnancies that destroyed her health. She ruled for 4 years while dying of cancer. The students are quiet now, actually listening. The burnings were wrong. Absolutely. Should she have made different choices? Yes. But was she a monster? No. She was a traumatized woman with power she'd fought for her whole life trying to create meaning from suffering. And when that didn't work, she made terrible decisions. What happened to her? She died at 42, named her Protestant half-sister as successor, asked that Maryland be remembered. And then she was mostly forgotten for 200 years until historians started looking at the whole story instead of just the body count. A girl in the back speaks up. That's really sad. Yes, the guide agrees. It is. But here's what's important. Margot Thorne was Maryland's first woman governor. She proved women could hold executive power. Every woman in political office since then stands on groundwork she laid, not because she was perfect, because she existed and refused to disappear. The tour moves on, but the girl stays behind, looks at the portrait, at Margot's sad eyes and determined jaw. You deserve better, the girl whispers. And somewhere in whatever space exists between history and memory, maybe Margot hears. Maybe she finally understands that being remembered with compassion, even centuries late, still counts as being remembered. The portrait hangs. The story continues. And every person who stops to look at those sad eyes and asks, what happened to her, keeps Margot Thorne from being what she feared most. Forgotten, erased, as if she'd never mattered at all. She mattered, in complicated, painful, imperfect ways. But she mattered, and that finally is her legacy. Not crimson, not tragic, not perfect, just human, which is the hardest thing of all to be when the world demands you be either hero or villain. Margot Thorne was neither. She was both. She was herself. And 400 years later, that's still enough to make people stop and wonder what could have been different if the world had been kinder. We'll never know, but we can keep asking. And maybe that's the point.